Well, what do you know? 105 points higher, just like that, half an hour to go before trade ends for the day today. The high of the Sensex and the low of the Sensex are giving you an indication that this market is range bound but so volatile. The high is 15,228, the low is 14,888. So we've moved in roughly about a 250 point band on the Sensex, and even the Nifty for its part is about 15 points higher. From the high point of the day to the low point of the day, we've done about roughly about 80 or 90 odd points. It's interesting these times that we live in. Metals continue to outperform. We've been in conversation with Ashu Madan. We're also joined by Mr. Balakrishnan now from Centrum. Good afternoon to both of you once again. Mr. Balakrishnan, what are you making of this? Range-bound, consolidated, violent, volatile, all of that happening over the last 3 days. Is this the direction that the market is going to take?
I think this kind of drift will continue. I think my feel was that if anything, the future earnings prospects are looking weaker than before with each passing day as demand is getting compressed over. It's not that oil price is coming down because of some reason, it's probably because demand is also cooling off. So you are seeing pressures on global economy everywhere, so we are not going to be immune. You look at textiles, you hear about orders getting cancelled. You talk to software companies, there is weakness everywhere, interest rates going up. So if earnings are going to be falling, I think the market is probably overpriced at this range. So and the future expectations seem to be just not there and on a positive note. So I think this kind of drift will continue and we'll probably see lower levels.
Two sectors that have been in focus today have been the fertilizers because of the new investment policy, and overnight the Chaturvedi report, parts of it getting public with respect to the oil and gas sector. How are you positioned with these developments on these two sectors?
Well, I think it is a very sad development, at least as far as the oil sector goes, because I think more than what impacts the companies, I think it's basically that it's a strong signal that the government is interfering into some sectors for whatever reasons which are there. I think the inflation is not to be addressed this way. I think subsidies have to be removed and rationalized rather than hit into somebody's pockets. What you're doing is you're deterring investments into this sector. Now, as a shareholder, I think in the 80s and 90s we used to be always worried about government policies and avoid those sectors. After 90s we saw liberalization and things, government getting less and less into business. But this is a very, very negative and disturbing sign. If this happens, I think it will erode investor confidence dramatically.
Talking about the government, how positive are you on the government's reform agenda? Do you buy into it, and if at all, do you think will it be done in the short term?
Well, that's a tough ask, because anything, if it has to be done, it has to go through the government. I think logically reform should go through. At what speed, one doesn't know.
But if one wants to play either the retail or the banking pack, hoping for reforms, would you think that's a smart move?
Not really. I think banking, there is still, apart from the political will, I think there is also the strong union issue. We saw what happened last time when State Bank there was an issue. 3 days there was a strike and the government had to just buckle down. So that is one issue there.
Talking about unions, the union at BSNL is not too positive on that IPO. In fact, that offer from the management has been rejected. What is your own view on the IPO and the remaining stocks in the teleco space?
No, basically I think the entire thing, looking at this committee reports on the oil sector or on this kind of things, my feel is so long as the government is in the management, it's best to avoid these stocks. Otherwise you got to live with worries as to who's going to be in power, who's aligned with whom. So best is there are other stocks in the world, so you can look at them. So why look at these things and suffer through the daily morning hangover?
Just in terms of the issue size of a possible BSNL IPO, you think there's enough liquidity in those markets to support it?
I think in present market conditions the size seems to be a little scary. Definitely.
Sector, it's got some people excited over here, some noises you can hear, but let's get Mr. Balakrishnan's thoughts into it. How are you positioned on the sector?
Well, I think sugar, about 6 months ago we turned a little bullish, because what had happened, we had sent out, the analysts had visited the sugar belt in Maharashtra, and what we found was that the area under cultivation was getting lesser, and because there was a lot of shift out of sugar into other crops, and our estimate was that there could be a slight demand-supply mismatch, which would lead to pressure on sugar production. And our call was that sugar producers would benefit, and we said the prices could reach as high as 2200 at the wholesale level.
Right, Mr. Balakrishnan.
So there might be a short-term play in that.
Hold that thought.
Enough drama in those markets as well. If you're
Exactly.
not a movie fan, we're now looking at just about 46 points up on the Sensex. But that bellies the kind of intraday movement we've seen, a high of 15,228 on the Sensex, which then touched a low of 14,888 points. Currently trading, like I mentioned, just 52 points up. You think the volatility is here to stay, Bala?
It's always been there. I think last 3 years we've seen moves of almost sometimes 1,000 points plus. So I guess that will stay.
Is
We are
this
now
then
the
a trader's
weekends.
market or an investor's market?
See, I believe all markets are investors' market. I think traders are, you can't wish them away. They create the liquidity and they provide the stories to the market. I think you will always find investment opportunities. I think if you are a believer in stocks and you have the money.
Speaking of liquidity, does the FI outflow figure bother you?
Well, it was expected, but I think it's far less than what I had anticipated. So to that extent, I'm less worried. I don't think there is a runaway thing. We have not seen even 10-15% of what they have put in. I think if I was more worried about 25-30% types of money going out, which probably I think if there's no further spike in interest rates, hopefully the markets will stay where they are.
You think the macros are improving though? Crude has cooled off a bit,
See,
inflation.
inflation is slightly coming off is my call, because I think not just crude, because crude inflation is not yet passed through to us, but crude has damaged the macro to the sense that it will add almost 6% of your GDP in terms of a deficit, 5 to 6%. In terms of inflation, I think the government numbers are yet to catch up, but I think on the street it started to cool off simply because at some price the buyers are walking out. So I think that is a good sign, but I think with demand not actually picking up, the problem is the monetary actions have cooled off the price by compressing demand, which is not a good sign from the corporate profit side. So I expect from the stock market perspective that the earnings projections are going to be again not met this time. There are going to be a lot of negative surprises as we run into the full year. Even this quarter, I think if we strip off some of the big accounting changes, that 16% might actually come to 8% or 7%, which is not a very good thing.